Welcome to Policy and Practice Bytes Risk Management, where we're going to talk about the risk management process that's employed by Otago University. We're going to briefly cover the four key areas listed on the screen. So we'll talk about what enterprise risk management is, the difference between risk and an issue, the risk context for Otago University, and how we manage risk within Otago University. Risk management is something we intuitively do every day. An example would be just drying the laundry after we've done the washing. There are objectives, there are risks, and there are controls. Enterprise risk management takes this common sense approach and makes it more formal and implements it in a systemic and systematic way to ensure that outcomes are more consistent. Enterprise risk management can be scaled up, so it can represent the risks that an organization faces as a whole, or it can be scaled down to divisions or departments or even individual tasks or responsibilities. There's a direct relationship between risks and issues. A risk is something that may happen in the future, and organizations seek to avoid that risk by implementing controls. An issue is the outcome of a risk that has already eventuated. So it's a risk that hasn't been managed as well as we'd like it to, and therefore a negative consequence has happened, and that's the issue. And that requires a reactive response. Enterprise risk management is interested in the cause and the context of the issue rather than managing the issue. The issue has already happened and that should be managed locally. But from a risk management perspective, we need to find out why that issue came about and what can we do to stop it happening in the future, and indeed what controls can we implement to stop it getting worse now. If we go back to the task of drying the laundry, if all those controls that we had listed failed repeatedly, we'd have to consider a new control, and perhaps we would buy a tumble dryer and only ever dry the washing in a tumble dryer, therefore eliminating the risks of the weather outside. When we talk about the context of risk for Otago University, as I said in earlier slides, the first thing we have to do is consider the objectives of the university. And then what we can do is we can identify the areas that the university works in and the things that it has to manage and the things it has to deliver. And then we can help to identify what could possibly go wrong in those areas. And the 1 to 8 examples that I've listed just give an indication of some of the strategic risks that Otago University has to navigate and has to manage on a daily basis. Otago University manages risks in a similar way to most other organisations that follow ASNZ Standard 31,2018. So it's a structured format. Not surprisingly, it begins with identification of the risk. But this isn't as simple as it might sound. It requires collaboration with wider stakeholders, and it requires an in-depth understanding of the strategic objectives and the key performance indicators that we have to achieve, but also the environment that we work in. Risk assessment is the process of scoring the risk. And the first thing we need to consider is what's the worst realistic outcome? What's the consequence if this risk actually happens? And then we consider the likelihood. What's the probability of that particular worst outcome eventuating? And that gives us a score which we can measure in the risk matrix. The first score that we get is what we call an initial risk score. This imagines that there are no controls in place to prevent the risk from happening. Once we've done that, we repeat the exercise, but this time we do consider the controls that we have in place. What do we currently have in place to stop that worst realistic outcome from taking place? It's important that we use the same worst realistic outcome so that we're comparing apples with apples. And the score that we get this time is the residual risk score. And this is the important score for the organization. It represents the actual score that we're currently exposed to. Once we've assessed the risk score, we can then decide what we're going to do about it. We could do nothing, we can apply further controls, we could transfer the risk through insurance or contracting the task out. Quite often those transfer controls are only effective for financial risks. And if we can avoid the task completely, then perhaps we can eliminate the risk, but that's rarely the case. Once the risks are recorded and the controls and the treatments are in place, we need to review and monitor those risks on an ongoing basis so that we can identify any changes that may have taken place and we can amend our plan accordingly. And we can also test our controls to make sure they're working effectively. So this presentation has been a really high level and quick introduction to enterprise risk management. What have we looked at? Well, we know what an enterprise risk management initiative is now, and it's simply an extension of the intuitive risk management that we all do every day. It's important that we work and collaborate with our wider stakeholders and we give people a voice and input into the risk management exercise because their information is vital so that we can identify risk and also measure the risk. If we implement risk management effectively, we'll find that we meet our objectives and targets in a much more linear format. We won't be zigzagging from problem to problem, and therefore we'll save time and money. The resources of an organization need to be focused on the highest risks first. Most risks can't be avoided. We have a job to do. We've got to do it in a certain way, and we've got certain locations and certain activities that can't be changed. So with that in mind, we have to consider what controls we can put in place to reduce the level of risk that we face. A control is something that's actually implemented today. It's happening. It's something we've done already. It's not something that's planned to be done. Whilst future plans are incredibly important and should be recorded so that we can progress track the development of those plans and the implementation. Those plans will not reduce a risk today. The only things that can reduce risk right now are the controls that are in place. So it's important that we distinguish between the two. I hope this has been informative. Thank you for taking the time to work through the presentation. If you have any questions, concerns, suggestions, I'd love to hear from you. So please contact me, and I hope to see you and speak to you in the future. Thank you.